Picture this, it's February 2011. A man sits in his palace surrounded by gold, power and decades of absolute control. His name? Muammar Gaddafi. He's ruled Libya for 42 years. He thinks he's untouchable. He's wrong. Within days, protests erupt across Libya. Peaceful demonstrators fill the streets of Benghazi demanding freedom, demanding change. But Gaddafi doesn't listen. Instead, he unleashes his military. Tanks roll through neighborhoods. Helicopters fire on crowds. The world watches in horror as a dictator declares war on his own people. And then, NATO decides to act. March 19th, 2011. The sky over Libya lights up with explosions. Over 110 Tomahawk cruise missiles rain down in a single night. American, British and French warplanes tear through Libyan airspace. They refer to it as humanitarian intervention. They call it protecting civilians. For 8 months, NATO FLIs over 26,000 sorties, 7,000 of them direct bombing runs. Gaddafi's forces crumble, his regime collapses. And in October 2011, the world saw the gruesome footage. Gaddafi dragged from a drainage pipe, beaten and killed by rebel forces. NATO celebrates. Mission accomplished, right? Wrong. What happens next is a nightmare no one predicted. Or maybe everyone should have predicted. Libya doesn't become a democracy. It doesn't become peaceful. It becomes hell on earth. Within months, the country splinters into chaos. Militias battle militias. Warlords carve up territories like pieces of meat. ISIS establishes a stronghold. Weapons flood across borders into Mali, Niger, Chad, destabilizing an entire region. Human trafficking explodes. Migrants are bought and sold in open-air slave markets. Yes, you heard that right, slave markets in 2025. The economy, once among the strongest in Africa, collapses completely. Oil production, Libya's lifeline, plummets by 90%. Electricity becomes a luxury. Clean water becomes rare. Hospitals run out of medicine, and the death toll. Estimates vary, but tens of thousands die in the years following Gaddafi's fall, far more than died during the initial uprising. A Harvard study later concludes that NATO's intervention didn't just fail to save lives, it multiplied the death count by 7 times. Today in 2026, Libya remains a failed state. 2 rival governments fight for control. Armed militias terrorize civilians daily. Just last month, heavy fighting in Tripoli killed innocent families, forced thousands to flee their homes, and left hospitals overwhelmed with gunshot victims. This is the Libya scenario. This is what keeps us officials awake at night. Because right now in February 2026, another country stands on the edge of that same abyss. A country with 10 times Libya's population, a country with nuclear ambitions, a country where millions are protesting in the streets, demanding change. That country is Iran. December 28, 2025. It starts with economics. Iran's currency, the rial, crashes to its lowest value in history, 1.5 million rials to $1. Imagine your entire life savings becoming worthless overnight. Bread prices triple, medicine becomes unaffordable, families can't feed their children, people take to the streets. All 31 provinces, millions of Iranians flood city squares, chanting one phrase that sends chills through the regime: death to the dictator. But here's where it gets dark. On January 8th to 9th, 2026, the Iranian government responds with unimaginable brutality. Security forces open fire, not warning shots, not tear gas, live ammunition, directly into crowds. Eyewitnesses describe hundreds of bodies across Tehran. Hospitals overflow with gunshot victims. International reports estimate between 30,000 and 36,500 protesters were killed in just 48 hours. 30,000 human beings in 2 days. The government arrests over 21,000 people. Executions skyrocket, 1500 in 2025 alone, the highest in decades. The internet gets shut down completely. Iran becomes a digital black hole. The world can't see what's happening inside. And then, Donald Trump enters the picture. January 2026. President Trump issues a direct threat. If Iran violently kills peaceful protesters, the US will come to their rescue. He deploys the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier to the region, along with a massive naval fleet. He calls it an armada heading to Iran. But Trump doesn't just threaten military action over the protests. He has another agenda: Iran's nuclear program. Here's the mystery. What does Trump actually want? In June 2025, the US and Israel already bombed Iran's nuclear facilities at Fordo, Isfahan and Natanz. They destroyed years of Iranian nuclear development. The unreimposed sanctions through the snapback mechanism, crippling Iran's economy even further. So why is Trump threatening to attack again? Some say it's about democracy saving Iranian protesters from a brutal regime. Some say it's about stopping Iran from rebuilding its nuclear program. Some say it's about geopolitical dominance crushing Iran's regional influence once and for all. But here's what terrifies us officials behind closed doors. Libya had 6 million people. Iran has 90 million. Libya's military was weak and isolated. Iran has battle-hardened forces, ballistic missiles and proxy militias across the Middle East. Libya had no nuclear program. Iran is months away from being able to build 10 nuclear bombs if it chooses to. And here's the real kicker. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, just issued his own warning. Any attack by the United States will spark a regional war in the Middle East. Think about that, a regional war. Not just Iran versus America, but Iran, Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq, Houthis in Yemen, all fighting simultaneously. Israel gets dragged in. Russia has interests. China backs Iran diplomatically. The entire Middle East could explode. This is the nightmare scenario. This is why, on February 1, 2026, NATO Ambassador Matthew Whitaker made an unprecedented statement. The United States doesn't want a Libyan scenario in Iran, 6 words, but they carry the weight of history's darkest lessons. Matthew Whitaker, US ambassador to NATO, appeared on Fox News and said something remarkable. Donald Trump doesn't want Iran to become destabilized like Libya was during Obama's time when Gaddafi was removed. Without a proper plan, let that sink in. A Trump administration official openly admitted that a previous US intervention was a catastrophic failure. Why? Because they've learned, they've seen the horror show in Libya. They know what happens when you topple a regime without thinking about what comes next. Whitaker explained that Trump's approach is different. Yes, there are red lines, no nuclear weapons, no mass executions of protesters, but the goal isn't chaos. The goal is calculated pressure, diplomatic leverage backed by military threat. But here's the human rights question we must ask. If the US doesn't want another Libya, why are they threatening military action at all? Let's talk about the real victims here, not politicians, not military strategists, not geopolitical chess pieces. The people, in Libya, ordinary families paid the price for humanitarian intervention. Mothers lost children, children became orphans, entire communities were erased, and 14 years later, Libyans are still suffering in a nightmare with no end. In Iran right now, brave protesters are risking everything for basic freedoms, for the right to speak, to live without fear, to have a future, and they're being massacred by their own government. But here's the tragic irony. If the US intervenes militarily, those same protesters could end up victims of American bombs. If the US doesn't intervene, they remain victims of Iranian bullets. There's no easy answer. Some argue that diplomatic pressure combined with sanctions can force Iran to change without military action. Others say economic sanctions only hurt ordinary Iranians while the regime survives. Some believe targeted strikes on nuclear facilities can prevent war. Others warn that any strike will trigger a regional catastrophe. The truth is, history is watching, and history has already shown us what happens when powerful nations play God with other countries' futures. Libya was supposed to be about protecting civilians. It became a case study in how intervention can create more suffering than it prevents. So what's the right move for Iran? Maybe the answer isn't found in Washington or Tehran. Maybe it's found in listening to the Iranian people themselves, not through the filter of governments or media, but in their own voices, their own demands, their own vision for their future. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about America versus Iran. It's about 90 million human beings who deserve to live in peace with dignity, with hope. The question isn't whether the US is terrified of history repeating. The question is, will we learn from history, or are we doomed to repeat it?